Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Catalyst webinar series presented by the Education Committee for the Southern California PGA. The Catalyst webinar series is a bi-weekly educational platform for creating success and change in your club and career. We are very excited to introduce our presenter this week, Mr. Roger Cleveland of Callaway Golf, one of the most innovative wedge designers in the history of club manufacturing. He's been making clubs for over 40 years. He's been with Callaway Golf for the last 23 of those 40 years. I'd like to welcome and say good morning to Mr. Cleveland. Mr. Cleveland, good morning, sir. Thanks for being on the Catalyst webinar series.
Pleasure, John. Thank you very much. Look forward
we are dying to know. Of course, in the golf business, you're always fascinated with people that have found extreme success. And we are dying to know, how you got started, where you went, the breaks you got, the hard work you put in, and how you got to where you are today.
Or why I've lasted so long. How's that?
Indeed.
Well, the history. I'm a Southern California guy. I grew up in Long Beach. By way of the Southern California Golf Association, I started playing real quickly. I'll just go why I'm in golf. I started playing, I was a kind of a multi-athlete at one time and loved football, baseball, like all kids do. And I started playing golf. And when I was 12, introduced to it by some friends, not my dad. And I got my dad playing later, but so I started playing around when I was about 12 and started playing the junior tournaments and started doing fairly well and won some and played in a couple of national juniors and was able to convince Stan Wood at USC to take me in a scholarship interest to USC and played an amateur. I was a little bit more successful as a junior than as a player than later on in college. There were some other distractions in college, and that kind of put me off a little bit, and so I didn't do as well there, but had a great time. So left there and went into business. Did a number of different things in business. Moved around to a few different companies. I was in the aerospace with McDonnell Douglas. Had a marketing / finance degree from USC, but then went into with McDonnell Douglas and then went back. I said, I got to get the bug of trying to play out of my system. So I went as an assistant pro for a few years back in Westchester County at a place called Willow Ridge Country Club in Harrison, New York, which it butted up next to Appowamus and Westchester Country Club. The pro was at a Jewish club. The pro was Roger Ginsburg, who was a fellow that was on the tour, a very good player, went off the tour as a head pro there. And he was an incredible retailer. We sold everything in that pro shop. So I had a great experience there. I went and tried to qualify for the tour and missed that. And I said, that's enough. And so I did that for about 3 years, had a great time, and then went back into business back there at Dun & Bradstreet, and then tried to get back to the West Coast and did. Nobody wanted to hire people without experience. And I had not much experience, but got into sales and so forth. I started collecting old golf clubs and the history of clubs quite early, and I'm talking about hickory clubs. So clubs that were designed and made really prior to 1930, 1927. Steel started to come into play at that time. So anything that was prior to that, I had an interest in, especially if there was a unique design or a patent around it. And so I started collecting that, and was always fascinated and interested in how things worked. And I always, since I missed so many greens growing up, I always started messing with wedges, and had a fairly decent short game. But I learned about wedges and what worked and what didn't work, and I started modifying things fairly early. So I got back to the West Coast, bounced around a little bit. I was introduced back into golf by a company called International Golf Travel that there was, in those days, this was in the 70s, mid 70s, you could qualify for the tour, and then you had the Monday spot, and there are usually 4 spots, and to go around the country and do that, and that was really risky. And there were state opens as they are today, and that's about all you could play in. And so Bruce Osborne, who is a Southern California guy, and unfortunately he's not with us anymore, but he said, and a fellow SC guy, and he said, come on, help me with this company a little bit and try and expand into amateur. But what he was doing is he was taking the pros on a kind of a escorted tour to events and venues in outside the country. So he would go down to Australia, and there were several tournaments there. Then he would go north up into Asia and India and so forth, and do the different open championships of the country. So the Philippine Open, the Indian Open, so forth. And he would organize that. So that's how I kind of got back into it. And in doing so, I got more interested in clubs at that time, and I was with Bruce about 2 or 3 years, and before he kicked me out, which I needed to be kicked out, but I wasn't. It was a really hard business to do amateur, to try and create some revenue from clubs, to create events for the members of the clubs to go to the different spots, and that's what I was trying to do. So I got back into clubs. So there was a gentleman by the name of Charlie Lyons who ran a company called 4-Star, which is a foundry. All the foundries back in those days, all the clubs were made in the United States. Wilson, McGregor, Spalding all had plants in the United States, and there were 2 big forging houses that fed all the parts, iron parts, to these companies. And so one of the foundries, there were 2 of them here on the West Coast. The primary fed all those casting, and Ping Karsten created he was an incredible engineer and did his own casting, and you all probably know about that. So there was 2 casting houses, 4-Star, and I'm trying to think of the other. Charlie's company, Charlie Lyons, was 4-Star in Paramount, California, and that's where he gave me an office, and I recreated a putter through my collection of hickory, my interest in history and of the game. Recreated Bobby Jones's Calamity Jane putter, and I wanted to have this as a presentation gift for member guests and so forth. I went back to the PGA show around 1980 with this, 81, and I looked around, and I was a very traditionalist in as far as design and the way the golf club would look, and all the companies and McGregor made the best woods in my opinion, but they had moved from their labor base, which was Cincinnati. Wilson had moved, Spalding had moved for cheaper labor, and with it, to make a wood, persimmon wood, there were a great number of steps. There were about 60 steps, and each successive step would you could ruin the club. So you really had to know, you had to be an artist, you had to have a great learning curve, and so a lot of that labor base that was created in those bases of Chicago, around Chicago for Wilson, and which was never noted for woods, but great irons. But MacGregor especially, they kind of lost it. And I looked around, and there was a wood maker by the name of Bobby Gonzalez that worked for Charlie Lyons at Four Star, and I said, let's make some woods. And so, and I had an idea of bringing back kind of the look of the MacGregor and the tradition of that. And that's what I started doing with him. And I actually started with woods, and then went to the tour, and through my junior golf and so forth, I knew a lot of really good players, and started showing them, and they wanted. I actually sold the clubs to them, though. I wanted to. When I went out there, I didn't have a lot of money. I started with very little money, almost nothing. But so I it was a qualifier. If they could pay $40 for the wood, I just charged my cost, and they would try it. So rather than giving it to them and having them not even try it and give it away to somebody. So I started to get a following out there, and I started getting some traction. So that's where, and then when I was out there, I started with woods first, wedges second, and then irons. Irons are complicated. Irons were too expensive for me to get into initially because of the two forging houses. They were pretty crudely forged in those days. They're really net forged now, to where you hardly take 13, 14 grams off of a forging now in polishing it. They're used to take off 30 grams, you used to have to shape everything. And that's why, there was a great learning curve in that as well as the polishing guys. And that's why Wilson, through Mandrella and guys like that, and Joe Phillips did such a good job with Wilson. So anyway, a great learning curve. And so I went out, and on the wedges, I played mostly Spalding when I was in college and so forth, but I modified that, and the most popular wedge in the tour, all the guys on the tour were playing MacGregor, not MacGregor, Wilson, 58 and 59 Dynapower wedges, and they were paying, back in those days, pretty good money, $300 to $400 each for them. And I didn't want to copy that, but I liked the soul of that. So I started with my first wedge that I did was done in 1985 that I actually did, and it was the fourth iron. So I called it the 485, and then 3 years later I did the fifth iron, and then 1988 it was introduced. So it was a little bit bigger, and the sole was a little bit wider, did different things through learning out on the tour. So I went out on the tour quite a bit, and that was my testing ground. I didn't have a test center like we do here at Callaway, which would have been sweet, but now I have it. But anyway, that's how I got going. And then we did some irons. The initial iron that I did was a open stock iron from Japan. There was some wonderful forging houses in Japan. I tried to do something here with the two companies here in the States, but it was just too expensive. And I can get an open stock set and modify the back and do some different things with grinding. And I spent a lot of time in Japan doing that with them, and learned a great deal, and brought that back, started introducing irons. But it was, I think, 86 or 87, we were the number one wood at the Masters, for example, and so we got some great pull and a lot of respect from the tour, and that's how the company started to get going. We had reps calling us and wanting to take the line, and we started growing. And we continued grow, but you know, along the way, I found out that I'm a fairly decent designer, I would say, and that's my strength, as I can see things. But along the way, you make some mistakes. You get over your skis, which I did several times, and so I had to divest or some of my ownership and get some money in because I saw the infrastructure of Metalwood started to come in. Mr. Gary Adams started to come into play, which was TaylorMade, and I saw that, and he did really well at first, and then it really tailed off, and then that's where Solomon Ski went and bought them, and then I needed some. I saw that woods were going away, metal woods were coming on, so I needed a lot more engineering and infrastructure and marketing and so forth, and so I went out and there were the public markets in those days weren't that active, and so the only money that I could get is by selling the company, and I sold the company to another ski entity. So it was Rossignol Ski, very, very nice people from France, from a beautiful spot in France. And they brought in a gentleman to run it, and after I did that in 1990 and the end of 90, and 5 years later, the gentleman showed me the door. We started not agreeing to the direction of the company. I wanted to stay pretty traditional and move in that direction, and he wanted to recreate Cleveland golf in the image of Ping and do things really almost 100% game improvement. And I was really tour based, and so we disagreed, and I was shown the door at the end of 95, and that's where I started. I got a few phone calls when I left there, which I didn't want to leave, but from another company, as well as Callaway Golf and Ely and Dick Helmstetter gave me a call and said, come and help design. And so I started in January 96 at Callaway, and and so I was kind of the designer with another guy, primary on the X series irons, the X 12, 14, 16, and then we started expanding that area, and it was pretty popular line of clubs, and I had a hand in at least the OML, or the shaping of woods, and did some stuff with putters. It was funny when they wanted me to do putters, and so I went and did a study of the best or most popular models on the tour. The tour really helps marketing of putters, especially because they're so visible and the cameras see and show up on the green so much. So I did I gave a presentation on the putters we should do, and there were like 6 basic models at that time. Certainly 2 or 3. I mean, the Ping Answer was, everybody has copied that, so that was one of them, and so forth. So anyway, I took it back, and they said, that's great. Now, Callaway was all about S2H2, which was short hollow hosel, and they said, well, these are great, but we can't have a hosel on these putters. So I said, well, so I went back and modified them, but the line didn't last very long without hosels. But I moved on to wedges, and I did the irons and for a long time, and helped with the woods, and certainly did all the wedges. And that's what I'm concentrating on now, are the wedges and the MD4, which is our current line right now, which is a very big line of wedges. It has three Three Souls. We just introduced a new, or several years ago, a Phil Mickelson wedge, which Phil has come on with us about, I'd say about 12 years ago, and very active with us. He lives fairly close by here in Rancho Santa Fe, and so he's pretty active. And so the first time he came into us, he wanted the most aggressive groove known to man. Of course, it had to be conforming, but so we made this wedge for him with this groove, and he gets to the test center and he hits this about a 40 yard shot. So it's not a full shot, but he swings full with an open face. This ball hits the green, which is, this 40 yards away, rips back about 30 feet. Okay. So he swings about 90 miles an hour on this shot, looks down at the club and sees a white, like a tire tread mark, okay, coming up the face of golf ball. And he starts laughing. He says, "That's my Mac Daddy groove." And we'd never heard that term before, and we all were laughing, and that's where the name Mac Daddy came from, is Phil. And we introduced that wedge. It was a conventional wedge, traditional wedge, and with a very specific sole. And then we later on, he's playing, and all of a sudden he puts, about 6 years ago, he puts a Ping wedge in his bag, a lob wedge with a high toe, the Ping high toe. And so I call him up and I said, "I'm going to lose my job if I can't make you a wedge that can compete." And he says, "Well, this is why I'm doing it." He gets into rough, opens the face, and he would fear that on a conventional size shape, he would go right under the ball. And so I understood that he needed some extra real estate. So we took that wedge that we had the sole on, we cut it in half, and there's a guy by the name of Perry Wald who welded it. You could not see the difference or any change in the material. You couldn't see the weld mark, but there was a big chunk on the top. So I took a Sharpie and I lined out a design, took it to the grinder and shaped it. And therefore I added a bunch of weight, so I had to take it out. And so I took it out on the sole, not changing the shape. So I had to undercut the sole and so forth. So it was tricky. So I took it out to Phil at the PGA Championship several years ago at Valhalla. And that's the tournament that he and Ricky Fowler came into the last hole, and the darkness came in a factor, and it got all messed up at the end. But Roy McIlroy won, and but he used that. I took it out Monday to show him, and he put on a display of a short game on Monday afternoon. It was unbelievable. He stopped the entire putting green at Valhalla. Guys just wanted to watch him. So it was two different faces on that club. So we took out the score lines on the top section that we welded on, and so I just put a Sharpie and indicated where the score line. This is just a prototype. And indicated where the score lines were, and he liked it so much he used it in the tournament. And so Chip Brewer, who thankfully came to Callaway, 6 years ago or something, who is a godsend to our company, because we've had some mixed management, to say the least, at Callaway. And I'm sure you guys are familiar with some of that, but as bad as it has been, it is good now. And so we have a great leader. So anyway, he said, "Why don't we, commercialize this?" And so that's where the first PM wedge came, and it's been really popular. During that evolution or the iterations of making the commercial version of that, Phil was very active. So he said, let's do this. And one of the things we were trying is, because when you open the wedge, you actually reduce the area heel to toe of the area that you hit, and you start to hit further up the face because of the increase the loft, and he would get grass stains way at the top. And so we had score lines, and we said, why do we stop them? And so we didn't. We put them all the way to the edge. And then the later versions, this new second generation, which we've introduced, has the micro positive grooves that go all the way out there as well. Well, there's 4 positives between each groove, and it creates more spin. We actually put them on an angle, on a 20-degree angle, so when you open the face, you're getting more traction, about 400 RPM more of spin, which is what you want when you want to hit a little shot. You want as much control as you can, and that's control over the ball. So we have the reason why I went to Callaway. One of the reasons I went to Callaway, and besides Ely and Dick Helmstetter, which were great individuals and great people, was the emphasis Dick put on R&D. So I really loved that part of it. And what I came in to do is design, not manage any company. And that's going retrospectively back to Cleveland. I did some things well and some things poor. So I found out real quickly what I did wrong. But I just wanted what I did right a lot of the times was design, and so that's what I wanted to stay with, and they allowed me to do that, and I'm still allowed to do that in the area that I love, and that's wedges. And Chip Brewer and the folks here allow me to do that, so it's exciting for me. I live in Los Angeles. I work down in Carlsbad, so I don't drive that every day. I'm not that stupid, but I come down usually on a Tuesday and leave Thursday, and I, get some things done, and I travel a lot. I'm doing these days. I'm out on the tour a lot, working with players, and you get a lot of feedback from those guys, and I'm doing a lot of seminars or not seminars, but teaching. I do some seminars, but teaching and the members at clubs, with member guests, and they feature the wedges, and they come out and talk about the wedges and why, and that's an area that I have loved always, and I have really kind of when I go out to do these seminars or these clinics, I really get the pros and the staffs involved, because I like to explain that the difference of the technique of pitching the ball is so different than your big swing. So you have and I think pitching the ball is like 40 yards. That technique is like 40 yards in. A bunker shot is an exaggeration of that technique. And I've had the privilege of working with, and seeing some of the greats playing at Cleveland. We had a great staff and got to pick the brains of some of the, obviously the best players in the world. Some of them didn't understand what they were doing, but and they did it so well. But I had a chance to also get with some of the great instructors, and these days in the short game, I have a nice relationship with Peter Cowan from England, who's, I think, outstanding. But James, I think the other guys are really good. Stan Utley and James Seekman, I think, have a great technique, and I like James's book and Stan's. I think they are very good. And Peter Cowan, I don't know if he's got some videos, but I don't know if he has a book out. But I really incorporate a lot of their thoughts and techniques in my presentation. A lot of members, you don't get a chance to really talk to somebody, and once you explain this to them, they find it less difficult to hit these shots and start to understand it. And because you got to use the design of wedges, you have a sole and a bounce and so forth, and and it changes based upon your technique and the conditions that you play in. But you have to, once you explain that and why, and based upon the technique, you have different options. And with Callaway, for example, we have the PM, which is a little wider option. It's more like a Sure Out now. But you on the MD4, you have 3 options or actually 4 options. But there, it's really what we have is a fitting system based upon their technique, and so it's easy to fit wedges. And I try and encourage all the members to the next time you go out, take a lesson in your short game, because the fastest way you're going to lower your score and improve your game and increase your enjoyment and have some fun. The tour players work really hard on their short game. They don't hit 18 greens. I mean, they average, of course, they're playing really difficult golf courses and they're set up really hard and the pins are tucked, but they'll miss, 6 greens, 5 greens, whatever, and they'll shoot 68. And so they really work at their technique. Bill does for sure. So that's what I'm doing, and we're constantly putting a lot of R&D and development into the wedge. I have the privilege of working with one of your members, Randy Peterson, who heads up our test facility and our teaching and everything at Callaway, and we're instrumental in something that's coming out, or he was instrumental in something that's coming out pretty soon, or sometime this year, as you well imagine. We iterate often, maybe too often sometimes, with wedges, because the technology in wedges, we're not going to have the flash face in a wedge. You're not going to hit it 20 yards further with a wedge. You don't necessarily want that, but you do want spin, and so our technology is on the face and with the center of gravity, which people have been focused on, other companies, and so have we. So those are some of the things that I'm doing, John.
Well, fantastic, Mr. Cleveland. Would you say, on all of these, innovative design components, how important has the marketing of various design components been with each wedge that you've produced, and what kind of role did the marketing play in the success of that club getting out there?
Well, you have hit on a little bit of a sore subject. It's interesting. We have, up to this point, we have had no marketing on the wedge. It's word of mouth, and you'll see it on no advertising, no print advertising, except for it's in the catalog. And we might we'll do, it's obviously on our media, which is a section of the media where you can log into and search and go into wedges, and we just tell you what our wedges are on the internet. But we have no marketing from television or ads of other publications that are now on the internet as well. But maybe that might change in the future. That would be exciting, so we could be a little bit more competitive. But our wedges are really, I think, quite good, and we're number 2 in total sales now, I guess, and certainly in green grass we're number 2, strong number 2, and when you add them, both the boxes and the green grass, we're number 2, which is pretty good without any advertising. But that might change. But the word of mouth on tour, the word of mouth of the clubs, one of the things that Chip is so interested in is getting more exposure and more support of the golf professional at the green grass at the clubs. And we've really made a concerted effort to do that. And that's some of the things that I'm doing as well, supporting that. But that's where our sales and has really done really well, and it expanded.
Of all your design innovations, particularly pertaining to the wedge, what are you most proud of?
I think the way the wedge. I think you have to, when you look at a product, no matter what the product is, a driver, hybrid, fairway wood, irons, it has to really look like one that's going to work, pleasing to the eye, and inside that package, you can based upon the product, you can have different amounts of technology, and that's what we're, I think, really pretty good at here at Callaway. Is we have, I think, the biggest spend in R&D of any company, and we work pretty hard at it, and so do other companies. But there's a lot of competition, as you know. But I think the product, which I'm most proud of, is the way the product looks, and in the wedges, there's not much performance that you can do. I mean, the sole designs are critical. So you have to understand that, there's so much misinformation in wedges, at least stamped on the wedges. And that's why the numbers on our wedge that might be interpreted as bounce are really, it's a fitting system. It's 8, 10, and 12. And that doesn't indicate the bounce. So I'd like to talk about that for a second. The lob wedge is, if you go to the tour, the lob wedge is, you have to have a skid plate on a lob wedge. You have to have a skid plate on everything. You don't. Years back, some of the irons were made, especially if you look at some of the early Hogan irons. Wilson figured this out, but Mr. Hogan, when he started, these things were like knives. They actually had a negative bounce. But he played on very firm conditions, and conditions of agronomy back then. They're, the watering systems and so forth. So he needed to get down to the ball, so he needed less bounce. So, but in wedges, you need to have that skid plate, and based upon your angle of attack and your technique, if you have a lot of set or wrist cock in your technique, you're going to be steeper, and you're going to actually slow down at the ball or slow your body down at the ball to get the head down to the ball and the sole on the ground. So the ideal technique is less set, so you can create speed at the speed at the bottom. But based upon those two things, there's bounce. So typically the tour plays with anything from 10 to 13 degrees of bounce on their lob wedges. So that's what we have. We have about 13 degrees on the C grind and the S, and but the soles are not so wide. So you get the leading edge under the ball, and that the bounce or that angle helps you skid through the turf and contact the ball. And that's really a pitch shot. You contact the surface or the ground actually before the ball. You're not hitting the ball first. That's what people don't understand. That's where a big shot or a full shot, you're hitting the ball first and taking the low point of your swing or your arc is after you hit the ball. But in a pitch shot, it isn't, and so you need that skid plate. So we have a W, which is a very wide sole. It has a little bit less bounce because the wider the sole, that is bounce in itself. So you need a little bit less bounce. That has about 11 or 12. And then we have one, if you're really steep and want to open the face, we have an X grind that actually has 18 degrees of bounce, but plays beautifully because it's very narrow. And it's for those people who are steep and want to open the face. So we have those three options of 8, 10, and 12. It's really a fitting system. Plus of course fills, which is 12 degrees, but it's fairly wide. But it has a lot of relief on the heel and the toe, and the radius is tight, so you can less displacement out of rough, less displacement out of sand, and that the leading edge is quite curved, or the tight radius, and that when you open the face of a wedge, you want to keep that leading edge under the ball, but you need to have bounce, which when you open the face, you increase the bounce, but since you relieve it in the heel, you can still slide it under the ball. So it's quite a good design.
What do you think is on the horizon in terms of the next wave of wedge innovative designs?
Well, everybody is, in wedges, the sole is critically important. I'll go back and to Phil's, what we did with Phil, and the fact that, he grew up playing ping, and the ping design, Carson put a high toe on that, and Phil loved that for the reason that I described. And so we made that, but that was so popular with the tour and other staffs of the tour that it was copied, and you're seeing that now. And Ping actually reintroduced a version of that original, which is fun. So I think you're going to see some unique designs like that. You're going to see, I think, more emphasis on fitting, and that's what I like, is fitting options for fitting technique with players, and also spin control. We have done an incredible job on the face. The USGA has a lot of rules, but in design on groove, which they've changed, a few years back. But they not only have a groove, real tight tolerances on grooves, but also face roughness. And so everybody used to laser in different designs to create a certain amount of roughness on the face, but it would go away really fast. The MD4, one of our guys, Brad Rice, who's one of our really smart guys here, said, well, instead of going down, why don't we go up? And so we actually machined down, leaving 4 edges up between each groove. Not only do we machine the groove, we machine edges that are positives between each groove. So it takes about 10 minutes to machine one wedge, about 10, 8.5 to 9 minutes, to machine each wedge that we make. And we put these micro positives that in rough, in testing, in rough, and in wet conditions, it's around 1,000 RPM more spin. So the technology is in spin and face technology and or texture and groove technology in wedges. And you're going to see some more stuff coming. I mean, we actually angled those on the second generation Mickelson wedge, or the PM wedge, to where they're more effective when you open the face. So, and particularly on lob wedges. So you're going to see a lot of attention to that, I think, because the rules are not going to change, I don't think. And we have really almost mitigated. We're back to almost, where we were before the the change in the rule. But I think the rule change really helped golfers, because that box groove, the edges were so sharp that we would have it in the middle wedges, and you create so much spin you couldn't even hold a ball back to a back pin. So we actually changed. We have 2 grooves, So as you go down the loft, we change the groove so you don't have as much spin. You haven't as much spin to stop the ball, but you don't want it ripping back. You want to control it. So there's a lot of attention to that, and you'll see that with other manufacturers. There's also weight distribution as you move the center of gravity up the face. You'll see that on some manufacturers. That's why we have holes in our head at Callaway on the wedges, and the sole you'll see holes that actually remove weight down, and so we can redistribute it up. Other manufacturers do a little bit more of that, but you have to be leery of how much weight you move up the face, because as you move up the face, you actually create such a high CG that you will have dynamic de-lofting on a full shot with a wedge. If you have a 60-degree wedge, for example, you're going to be swinging, you'll be actually hitting the ball with less loft. And what happens is that if you don't have the proper sole, you'll start digging, and so you have to add bounce to those wedges that you see with the higher CG, and so because of that, you might have too much bounce when you have tight little shots around the green. So there's a combination. There's a trade-off there that I think is very important. It might be really good for a 60-yard shot, 70-yard shot, but you get around a little tight shot that you have to hit over a bunker or hit over a little mound or something to get, and you can't get the leading edge under because you have too much bounce. So you have to pay attention to all that stuff, which we do.
Now, you had mentioned 400 RPM increase, and then you said 1,000 RPM increase. Can you clarify?
Yeah, well, we're on full shots. We were just hitting little shots with the 400 on the PM. We were just comparing a standard wedge with that of what the micros will do in an open face situation on about a 20-yard shot where you're trying to elevate it over a bunker or something like that. And this is robot testing, so it's pretty finite. But on full, what the 1,000 is full shots.
Oh, very good. How significant is the ball over the last 20 years in all of this?
Well, you're talking to. I think it's very significant, but that is not my territory. We have, the Chrome Soft, I think, has done a great job, and I think it's number 2 to the Venerable Giant Titleist, but we're taking little bites out of that, and our engineers, and we're proud to say that we have expanded in our investment in Chicopee, Massachusetts, where we took over the Spalding plant, and we've expanded it, and we're going crazy back there with so our ball manufacturing is very good, and the manufacturing is good, but the ball is really good. But the ball has been significant. I mean, it's all balls today are the way that we test, the way the quality of all the golf balls are much better than they used to be, and so the end result is everybody's playing with a much better ball, and we're pretty close.
I guess just to go deeper into that, in terms of, a big part of wedge design and wedge manufacturing is to create a club that's easy for the players to control. And my question is more, how has the ball played a role in helping you create a wedge that helps the player have more control?
Well, there are certainly golf balls that the high performance golf balls are typically ones that will do both, will be long and have a chance or opportunity to spin because of the multi layers that you have. But there are differences. Some of the harder balls, even on the tour level ball, have less control around the greens, but the guys just want to hit it farther, or will control the spin with their irons better. Some spin their irons too much, so they want to use a particular ball, so they have a little less control around the greens, and so they know that, and so they'll take that option versus a ball that has more control or more spin around the greens. So there's options out there, a lot of them. The answer, I guess, is that it's individual, but you have to make sure that you have the right ball for you and what you want. If you want more control around the greens, there are balls for that.
And what ball do you predominantly test with?
Well, we have two. We have more than two, but I'm unfortunately, in all the technology that we have doesn't benefit me as much as other people, because I'm going the other way. I'm getting slower and shorter every day, it seems. So, all the compliance that we do on the drivers and everything, the flash face and all the things that we do there, the faster you swing, the more benefit that you get. And so I'm trying to reverse that, but I haven't convinced these guys yet to do that. They haven't found the way anyway. I'll let you know when we do. So what ball? I use the Chrome Soft X. It's a little firmer than the Chrome Soft. I love the Chrome Soft with wedges, but I like to have a little firmer ball myself, and it has plenty of control around the greens, so it satisfies both my desires. But
well, thank you very much.
We have a ball though, the Triple Track, which is a golf ball that we just came out with, is an example of being a little bit longer. It's what I should probably play with, but there's a little less control around the green, but it's a little longer. So there's usually a little bit of a trade-off. But the Triple Track, that pattern, that design is so unique that it kind of speeds up your alignment. And that's an interesting situation. Most of the tour players, I'd say 70% of the tour players have a line on their ball. I'd say 10% of the amateurs. And so that's one thing that the amateur can really gain, is lining up properly. Now, you don't have to, some of these guys take a lot of time, but I think you can line up and learn how to do it. There's a learning curve at actually putting that ball down, but 3 lines, you can line it up faster than 1 line. That's science in that as well.
Well, very good. Mr. Cleveland, thank you very, very much for your time and preparation and presenting to the section this morning. Just a wealth of knowledge, and we appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to do this for us. Tremendous.
I just hope I didn't put anybody to sleep, is what I hope. So, but if there's any questions, I'd love to answer them.
Well, those are most of the questions that have come in from the attendees this morning. For all the attendees that are in this morning's Catalyst, the quiz, there'll be a short quiz on this morning's content that'll be going out to all of the registered attendees, along with the YouTube link for the recording of this morning's Catalyst with Mr. Cleveland as well. Please take the quiz and return it to Sharon Kerfman at skerfman@pgahq.com. A score of 70% or higher will earn 1 MSR credit for attending this morning's Catalyst. We'd like to thank Mr. Cleveland for his time and effort. Thank you very much, sir. We do appreciate it.
Pleasure.
And thank you, everybody, for supporting the Catalyst webinar. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Thank you very much, Mr. Cleveland. Have a good day, sir.
Thank you. Take care.